It's 7 o'clock. This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Tonight, 4 of Britain's most senior female politicians go head-to-head on all the key election issues. This is the LBC Women Leaders Debate, hosted by Ian Dale.
Good evening, I'm Ian Dale. Welcome to the Women Leaders Debate here on LBC. In the next 90 minutes, it's your chance to question 4 of Britain's leading female politicians on the issues that will decide the general election. You've waited some time for a proper debate with the 4 main parties, and here it is. Harriet Harman is the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. For the Conservatives, it's Education Secretary Nicky Morgan. Representing UKIP, it's their Justice spokeswoman Diane James. And for the Liberal Democrats, it's Home Office Minister Lynn Featherstone. Well, welcome to you all. Now, the rules are very straightforward. We're going to be taking questions from you, the LBC audience. None of the politicians have the slightest clue of what they're going to be asked. Our panel will also get the chance to quiz each other. Now, as well as listening, you can watch us live on lbc.co.uk from our studios here in Leicester Square, and you can take part using the hashtag #BritainDecides. So let's get on with the debate. The first question comes from James in Hampton. James, what would you like to ask?
Yes, hello. So my question is, what practical measures would you take in government to stop young people being recruited by Islamic State and make them feel like they belong in Britain?
Nicky Morgan.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for the first question, James. We have already, in government, talked about the need for young people to be educated, all young people, because there is no place for extremism in any of our organisations. I'm thinking particularly about schools, obviously, being the Education Secretary. But there is no place for extremism, and we want all young people to be aware of British values. And I think it's important that we talk about the values that we hold dear as a country, things like democracy, rule of law, tolerance, respect for others, of others' faiths and beliefs. And as I say, the things that make us Britain, really. And I think in that way, people subscribing to those core values will want to protect those and not listen to those who want to preach hatred and extremism.
Harriet Harman.
Well, I agree with what Nicky Morgan has said, and I would add to it that I think that we could give more advice to parents and schools as to what to watch out for, and if they have worries and concerns, what to do about it. It wasn't in the Bethnal Green Academy. One girl had already gone to Syria, and the parents and the teachers weren't informed and discussing it with each other until another 3 girls had gone. So I think that we need to... This is a difficult area. Nobody's got any easy answers on it. But I think that parents and teachers are in the front line of protecting children from what is grooming as much as it's radicalisation, especially when it's young children involved or teenagers.
Now, Lynn Featherstone, you're a Home Office Minister.
Yeah.
What more do you think could be done by your own department that hasn't been done?
Well, I think it's less to do with the Home Office than perhaps it is the Department of Communities and Local Government, because in terms of what's happening, what was really awful in a sense about when the 3 girls went off to Syria was an us and them kind of thing. But these are all our children, and I think the most important thing that we can do is reach out, each of us personally. It's not just the Home Office, it's not just government ministers, but all in our own communities. I mean, I've been leading on a unity campaign. I've been going to all the mosques, all the synagogues, to the community groups, to the youth groups, to those of no faith, to say this is a time where we need to support each other, stand up for each other, and reach out to each other. That way, we know each other. It's not knowing each other, not trusting each other, that allows our children to be groomed and taken off into the most hideous of futures.
Diane James.
Yes, I think well, first of all, James, thank you very much for the question. I'm sorry I'm your 4th responder, but I'll give you my best. I think the issue for me and for UKIP is very much one of the multicultural agenda. Now, we've allowed lots of communities to establish themselves in the UK, but what we've tended to do is ensure that they stayed insular. We didn't take the steps to fully integrate them. And therefore, I think the situation requires a certain amount of both in and out integration pressure from, as my colleagues here have said this evening, teachers and other frontline services, but also a certain amount of carrot and stick. And there has been suggestions, to give you one example, of individuals leaving the country revoking their passports. And I think that's the sort of issue in terms of possibly the stick approach, the deterrent approach, that young people really ought to get a feel for and understand. Because For them, there's this real attraction, obviously, to go out, to leave the country and go and support a war situation and a war effort, but not necessarily understanding the implications of that decision.
No, we should explain, Diane, that you stepped in up to the breach here because Suzanne Evans was supposed to be here, but she's unfortunately lost her voice, which I suppose no politician in an election campaign wants to do. Harriet Harman, I can't imagine you ever losing your voice.
Well, I am on the verge of it, but I'm going to just keep it long enough to disagree with what Diane's just said, if that's possible.
OK, carry on.
Well, I don't think you can blame multiculturalism for young children teenagers being groomed and going off to Syria, girls as well as boys. I think multiculturalism is not about segregation and people staying insular. I think it's about people being British but celebrating the heritage of where their family might have originated. And I think we should allow people to be British and also proud of their origins. And also this thing about taking people's passports away is absolute nonsense. As Lynn said, these are children who are born and brought up in this country. We can't just dump them somewhere else. It is our problem, all of ours problem. It's their parents' problem, it's the parents' problem, it's the school's problem, but it's all of our problem. You can't just, it's really going on it. So not only do they want all immigrants out of here, i.e. foreigners, but they want anybody whose family might have come from abroad in the past to be kicked out.
Diane
and
James,
I think that's nasty, divisive
I suspect
politics.
you might want to respond to that very quickly.
Yes, there's a very clear difference between young people who are children and obviously trying to understand and rehabilitate them, but individuals of an age when they fully understand the implications of the decision they've taken, that's where I'm talking about the passport revocation.
But if they're born and brought up here, why should we dump them on another country? We've got to take responsibility for them. If they committed a criminal offence, we should put them in prison. If they haven't, well, they should not be in prison. But you can't just chuck people out of the country when they're British and born here.
Nicky Morgan, an allied question to this. It's been brought up a little already. In your mind, are these children who go to Syria to join Islamic State victims or criminals?
Well, I think we discussed this last time I was on, actually, and I think, every case will have to be judged on its own merits. But I think someone's used the word grooming already, and I think that's right, actually, in many cases where somebody who's already out there, somebody sends messages about what they're tempting them out there and lead them to believe that they might be doing the right thing. I actually think at the age of 15, I suspect that a lot of these young girls did not know what they were getting into, and therefore I think actually grooming is the right word to use. But I think, as some of us have alluded to already, this is about building a strong community, a sense of obligation to Britain, and exactly as Harriet said, a lot of these young people, they are British. They've been brought up here, and this what we need them to feel is that this is very much their country, and they're not tempted by siren voices from abroad.
But Lynn Featherstone, if young people, and let's say they are under the age of 18, go to fight in a foreign war, surely they have to be treated as criminals, even terrorists, when they come back?
I think you have to look into the circumstances of every case. If they're over the age at which they can be tried and convicted for criminal offences, then that's what should happen. But in the case of these girls, if you're talking about 16 and 15, it is more a matter of grooming, and it is more a matter of pathways. And I think one of the big issues in talking to the communities, what they say is, we worry about our sons because we feel they don't have a future, a viable future in this country. They feel it, not the parents. And they're joining gangs is one way, or they're getting involved in drugs is another, or they're looking at ISIS as if it's some romantic, heroic place to go. That's what we have to do, is we have to make the offer in this country as real to every single person in every single community. Otherwise, this is the result.
But can I just mention, I think that your question, which was, are they victims or criminals, I think it's not the right way of looking at it. And I would agree with Lynn, and it does sometimes happen with gangs, is that a gang will pick upon vulnerable young people to kind of draw them into the gang, bully them if they're not in the gang, curry favour with them if they're in the gang, and then get them to store drugs or to carry weapons. And actually it's sometimes those most vulnerable ones that end up then doing criminal offences. And as Lynn says, you have to look at it case by case to work out how to deal with it.
And we've got a text from Sarah in Basingstoke, who says, "Your Prime Minister in March 2003, do you order our troops into battle in Iraq or not?" Harriet Harman.
Well, I thought that there was weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and that there was therefore every reason to go in and stop them being used. As it turns out, there weren't. If I'd have known then what I know now, which is there weren't weapons of mass destruction, I would not have supported that motion coming to the House of Commons, but actually it wouldn't have been put to the House of Commons. It was on a particular basis which turned out to be factually wrong, but it was in good faith.
Diane James?
Well, I'm just stunned by Harriet's comments there. There was Tony Blair making that decision, taking the House of Commons with him, and look at what he's done subsequently. He personally, I think, in my belief, has ensured that the Chilcot inquiry has not been released. We still have not got that proof that there were no weapons of mass destruction, although all the evidence is there.
Just to say that Tony Blair says he wants it out as soon as possible.
I'm sorry, Ian?
Tony Blair said he wants the Chilcot inquiry to report as soon as possible.
Well, why then has he been complicit in the degree of redaction that's gone on in terms of then the report has been held up?
I don't think you know what you're talking about, Diane. You're just talking out the back of your head.
Well, Harriet, no, I'm not. I'm talking about what is in the public...
You're just making wild allegations.
I'm talking about what is in the public domain, Harriet.
It's not in the public domain that Tony Blair is trying to cross everything out of the Chilcot report and he's trying to delay it. Yeah, it should have come out earlier. We can all agree with that. But, you know, and you might disagree with how I voted on the war in Iraq, but you know, why don't we just try and keep our politics a bit sane?
Diane,
that's a mad thought.
Carry on in a sane way, if you would.
Yes, some of the decisions that my opponents here this evening have taken in the past, let's say in the last decade, 15 years, taking us into war situations, we are now seeing the ramifications of those. And I think it's very unfortunate that the Chilcot inquiry, that Dr. Kelly, for instance, and his demise, all of that has been covered up. My concern at the moment is that there is a degree of warmongering, shall we say, being sounded, which potentially could take us into other conflicts.
You say these things have been covered up. What evidence do you have for that assertion?
Well, I'm glad you've helped me to count on that, Ian. I am very much like every other voter out there. We have to take on trust. We have to believe what we see in the media and in the press, hear on the radio, see on the BBC. I'm sure viewers, listeners out there have watched Dispatches, have watched Channel 4 programmes, have watched Panorama, all of those topical public affairs programmes, and they understand the issues. And the issues are, there is no proof of weapons of mass destruction. That's about the only area that I do agree with Harriet on. Therefore, the United Kingdom went into a conflict not understanding and not actually knowing the truth in terms of the reasoning behind that decision.
Lynn Featherstone, this is a bit of an easy one for you, I guess. Yes. It's probably the only easy question you're going to get tonight. You're Prime Minister in March 2003. Do you order our troops into battle in Iraq or not?
No, and famously the Liberal Democrats voted against the war in Iraq. I went on the march against the war in Iraq. And
I wonder if you'd been in government if you would have taken that decision.
Yes, I think I would. Actually, because of the Syria vote that came to Parliament, and it fell at the first hurdle, if you like. But had there been a second vote...
that was thanks to the Labour Party, not to the Liberal
Democrats.
Well,
indeed, but the first one was about a UN resolution, a vote in principle, and there was an agreement in the motion that said if we are to go to war for direct action, we will come back to Parliament. And I had said that I would resign if that came to a second vote, because I felt very strongly that we didn't know what we were getting into. We wouldn't have known what we were doing. And I think sometimes in the heat of passion and wanting to do the right thing, you can do the very wrong thing.
OK, Nicky Morgan, what would you have done?
I think I probably would have supported the motion. I probably would have believed the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. I mean, I think it's the question of people listening will think, well, actually, with hindsight, I think it's easy with hindsight to think differently. And I think that's one of the great things that Tony Blair did a disservice to this country, was that actually, up until that stage, I think if the Prime Minister stood in the House of Commons at the dispatch box and said to members of Parliament who sent those representatives of their constituents, I've seen the evidence, we need to now send troops in, we're going to commit people's lives to this, people who lay down prepared to lay down their lives for this country, I would have believed him. The sad thing is, of course, that now I think we would, all of us, ask questions of anybody who stood there and said, this is what we need to do with our armed forces now.
There's a difference between actually getting something wrong and not believing what you're saying. I think Tony Blair now recognises that there weren't weapons of mass destruction, but when he said to the House of Commons I don't doubt him for one moment.
People accuse Tony Blair, and we hear it a lot on this radio station, people accuse him of lying over this. You don't believe he lied,
No.
you believe that he believed it at the time.
Absolutely, and I think it's all too easy to accuse everybody of lying.
Okay.
And actually, it's much better if we deal with the arguments and take those arguments in good faith.
Let's move on to another question. We're joined by Liam, who's in Newcastle. Liam, what would you like to ask?
Do the benefits of EU immigration outweigh the problems associated with it?
Diane James.
Immigration in a controlled way is beneficial. And despite how the media would like to present it, UKIP is supportive of immigration. But we're supportive from the basis that we want people here that will contribute and, in effect, control our borders and control, on a needs base, the skills, the experience, the expertise that this country needs. So from my perspective, I've got no issue, neither has UKIP, with immigration. It's all about getting the numbers right, meeting the demands that, for instance, our industry needs, that our infrastructure needs, but cutting down and decreasing the scale of unskilled immigration to this country, which is causing so much hardship in terms of depressing wages and creating pressures on infrastructure.
Lynn Featherstone.
Well, my grandparents were immigrants. They went from the EU. I think the EU immigrants bring great benefits to our country, as I do think all immigration brings benefits to our country. In terms of jobs, the EU is responsible for about, is it 3 million jobs?
So Nick Clegg keeps telling us, yes.
Yes, I was trying to remember what my leader had said at that moment in time. Of course, we also, and people always forget that we have about 2 million people going the other way into Europe from England, from the United Kingdom, into other countries in Europe. And I think it's a wonderful exchange. I think the issue comes in terms of ensuring that people aren't working beneath the minimum wage. I think that's an absolute key point, and obviously that's something that we press for in our manifesto and would take forward.
Now, just let me remind you, before I go to Harriet Harman, that you can watch us. If you're listening to us, if you're enjoying it, you can watch us at lbc.co.uk. Harriet Harman.
We're an exporting country. We've got so many businesses and jobs that depend on Europe, which is our biggest export market. And I think we want to see our economy getting back on its feet and growing. And I really fear what would happen to our economy and the standards of living and the job prospects of people here if we pulled out of Europe. And it doesn't mean that it shouldn't change.
No, let's stick to the immigration issue. That's what Liam in Newcastle asked. He said, do the benefits of EU immigration outweigh the problems associated with it?
Oh, sorry, I thought he said, did the benefits of being in the EU?
No,
I didn't hear immigration.
Oh,
I think that the benefits are very important of the EU, as I've said, in terms of jobs. But there are things that need to change. For example, we don't agree with the idea of agencies recruiting for workers only elsewhere in Europe and not allowing British people to apply. We don't believe that people who come here from the EU who are working here but whose families are in other countries in the EU should be able to send child benefit back there. So I think we need change, but I think that the benefits of EU immigration do outweigh the disadvantages. But the way to get change is to work with our partners in Europe and be a strong, committed voice to Europe, not drift out of it.
And do you accept the argument that you can't fully control immigration unless you leave the EU because there is free movement of labour?
Well, you can control the impact of it by ensuring that people can't claim benefits unless they've contributed, by making sure that actually the minimum wage is properly enforced and you don't have people undercutting people who are here, exploiting migrant workers and undercutting terms and conditions.
Okay.
So I think you can deal with the effects of immigration. Yeah.
Okay, Nikki.
Well, what we need is a controlled immigration system. What we've seen in the course of this Parliament is having to deal with the last government's uncontrolled immigration policy. And I have to say, I'm sitting here slightly, my jaw dropping, listening to both Harriet and to Diane. We absolutely need people to come in to contribute, to pay their taxes. But what we've had to do in this last Parliament is to crack down on some of the abuses and people coming here for the wrong reasons. I have to say, I think UKIP are just all over the place in the immigration policy. We heard Nigel Farage just making things up when he was on the Today programme a couple of weeks ago. They went from having a cap to, then we're going to have a review. Some of them want to have an Australian points-based system. Diane sits here tonight and sounds incredibly reasonable, but I'm afraid I don't think that she's speaking for the rest of her party when it comes to immigration matters, not certainly according to people that I've met from her party. And in relation to Labour, I mean, I think the Labour Party have woken up to quite how the rest of the country feels about immigration. I remember being a candidate in my constituency, which I understand for Ofcom rules I can't talk about the name of it this evening, but people will know who I represent, in 2005 when we were talking about immigration, and it suited the Labour Party at that point not to have a debate about immigration, so I was called a racist in the local marketplace. And because we haven't had that debate, we've now got to the stage where actually people feel so strongly about the issue. It's absolutely right we should be debating immigration. But, we hear Peter Mandelson has said the Labour Party sent out search parties to get people to come here. And so what hasn't been taken into account is the impact that uncontrolled immigration has. And we have now, over the last 5 years, taken some difficult, tough decisions, the right decisions, to get things back in balance.
Those decisions, of course, have resulted in more immigration, because if you look at the latest figures, I think, was it 298,000 net inflow in the last year that we have figures for. You promised at the last election, the Conservative Party promised that there would be in tens of thousands. That promise has obviously been broken, and yet in this election you apparently are going to promise the same thing.
Well, one of the reasons why we've had so many people wanting to come here is because of the strong economy, because of the 1,000 jobs a day that we have been creating. When you look at the rest of the EU, they have nothing like that sort of job creation. And if we want to have a debate about EU, I mean, going back to Liam's question about the benefits, I mean, that's one of the things that we will be debating as part of an in-out referendum. The Conservative Party is the only party in this election promising to have an in-out referendum on the future of the EU. No other party, certainly UKIP, cannot deliver such a referendum, and the Labour Party, we heard from Edward Van, isn't interested.
Staying in? If we had a referendum tomorrow, would you be in favour of staying in?
I think it would depend very much on the basis on which, obviously, the negotiation and freedom of movement is going to be a key part of that negotiation. But yes, I mean, I think that actually we do get enormous benefits from our EU membership, but let's have that negotiation.
So if there wasn't a change in free movement of labour,
well, I think we need to see.
Then you'd want to vote out.
I'm not going to speculate about hypotheticals. But I do think immigration, freedom of movement of people, has to be a key part, and the Prime Minister has made that clear, of any negotiations about the EU. But the point is, people want to have their say.
You're trying to lean towards something, but then sort of give a hint, but not be clear. And I think it's such a big thing about whether we're in or out of the EU. I think you should be clear. Lynn's clear.
Very clear. You're clear. You want to stay in. Diane's clear.
We are clear. We want to give people a voice. People under the age of about 45 have not had their chance to have their say on the EU, on our membership,
that's about
on
the
how
process,
much it costs.
But what about the substantive issue?
Right.
Do you think we should be in or out?
We want to give people let's have that debate in this country, and that's something that, if you remember, Gordon Brown said we were going to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and then he snuck off and signed it, so we didn't get that vote.
I think
let's not go down that road, because we could be here all night on that. Let's take a little break from your questions for a moment and go to the first of our Ask Me Anything segments. Now, this is where one candidate has questions posed to them by each of the other three, and there are going to be 4 of these segments dotted throughout tonight's debate, each lasting 5 minutes. Now, the order's been drawn by lots, and the first to be questioned, and I'm sure she's delighted about this, is Lynn Featherstone.
Over the moon. Yeah.
Harriet Harman, what's your question for Lynn?
OK, I think it's sometimes worth working out where we agree with each other as well as where we disagree with each other. So can I ask Lynn Featherstone, which of the things that the last Labour government did when we were in government to support women's equality do you would most admire and agree with? But also, which of the coalition policies that you voted for do you really feel most uncomfortable about and most regret?
very sneaky, Harriet.
You'll have your chance to get your own back in a bit.
Yeah, excellent. I thought Labour, the Equality Act itself, I think was a great piece of work. I think that put under statute the rights, not just of women, but of all the different, whether it's gender, sexuality, disability. I thought that was a huge step forward. And I've forgotten the second point.
Which of the coalition things that you've had to vote for, holding your nose, do you most disapprove of?
But you see, that is the point
of... Say the bedroom tax.
I am going to say the bedroom tax. But that is the point of coalition.
And I think... can join us and abolish it if we get in.
Well, Harriet, you do have to remember that Labour introduced the bedroom tax effectively, or the spare room subsidy, when you said that people whose housing was being paid through housing benefit in the private sector could not have a spare room. This coalition moved that into the public sector with social housing, obviously. Where it's gone wrong, and the review and what we've been fighting for, what Lib Dems have fought for in the coalition, sure, hold our nose and vote for things, but make it better than it would have been without us. So the exemptions for people with disabilities. Sorry, Ian, you're waving your hand.
Well, I'm kind of waving because I want to move on to Diane.
Sorry.
Diane, what would you like to ask?
Given that in 2010, Lynn, the Lib Dems promised to scrap tuition fees, but they, and you personally understand, ended up voting to triple them.
I did.
Why on earth should voters believe a single word you say in this general election campaign?
Well, because we have beaten our chests and worn hair shirts and apologised over and over again. And I have to tell you, the real difference, I think, between Liberal Democrats and other parties, like the Labour Party, who said they wouldn't introduce tuition fees and did, said they wouldn't triple them and did, we felt terrible. We felt absolutely awful about it. You know, we were babes in the wood. It was our first...
That's seriously the best reason you can come up with.
No, what I'm saying is it was really a shock to us. I mean, maybe that sounds a bit naive. It was our first time as government ministers.
It so really
we
does,
fought
actually.
to make it... No, but we fought to make it the best policy that we could. We couldn't keep the NUS pledge that we signed. It wasn't our manifesto. Our manifesto wanted to abolish tuition fees after 6 years, I think it was. So we turned it effectively into a graduate tax, because the real issue here and the real problem here and the real thing that would have made us not forgive ourselves ever was if it stopped the poorest children or the young, the most coming from the most disadvantaged families going to college. And in fact, overall figures are up, and those coming from disadvantaged backgrounds are up. So it turned into a graduate tax, and although the payback is longer, it is less.
Nikki Morgan, your turn to throw a friendly question to your coalition partner.
Love this, Ian.
This is very good innovation. The question I want to ask Lynn really is that the Liberal Democrats are saying that they should become a partner in a future coalition. That's their role really in British politics is to
if we don't become
be
a majority government.
Well, okay. Let's deal in what's probably a little more realistic is that obviously based on the record. And I suppose the question I really have is the way that Nick Clegg was in the leaders' debates is why aren't you as a party proud of your record over the last 5 years? Why are you now starting to stand away from some of the things you've done and not be proud of actually what has been achieved by the coalition government over the past 5 years?
We are really proud, and we stand for collective responsibility, and we did it all together. But I think it's not wrong to want people to know the provenance of each idea. So if you take the raising of the tax threshold, for example, and the lowering of the highest rate of tax, which party did which? It was obvious that the Liberal Democrats raised the tax threshold, and I'm afraid it was obvious that the key thing for the Conservatives was the lowering of the higher rate of tax.
Right.
So the provenance is important, so people know us and understand us and what part we played in the coalition.
We have to move on. Let's get another question now from Kirsty, who's in Surrey. Kirsty, what's your question to our panel?
Hello. Do all-women shortlists assist or patronise women?
Well, that's short and sweet. Lynn Featherstone.
Both. I think Labour did a great thing when they had the all-women shortlists, and I've always been wildly off-message in my party because I thought they made a huge leap forward, and the face of Labour in Parliament changed with all-women shortlists. And I've been trying to persuade my party to do that.
Because your party's only got 12% of its MP
we are
are
very
female.
short of
7
women.
MPs out of, 57?
Yes, what I would say is we have a number, it's a very women-friendly party. We have...
Sounds it.
No, but it genuinely is. Over 50% of our members are women. Leader in Wales is women. Leader on the London government is a woman. We have 100% MEPs who are women. We only have one MEP. Sorry.
You were doing quite well until then.
Okay, but the serious point is, of course, in Parliament we have 7. But listen, last time we lost seats, we didn't gain seats, so we were unable to really change. We have women taking over for men MPs who are standing down. It is my dearest wish to see more women in Parliament. If we got a swing of 100 extra seats to us, you can live in hope.
I think you can live in hope.
I am living in hope. Listen, we would have lots of women.
Okay.
There is no discrimination
you want
in
your
the party
to adopt all women shortlist. That's the message.
If we don't do better at this election,
Okay.
and this will be a tough election
Harriet
for us to
Harman.
change that.
I think all women shortlists are important because otherwise politics just is a men-only business. And when I was first elected to the House of Commons, 97% of the MPs were men and only 3% women. And it was not surprising that women felt that they were not on an equal footing in this country if all the decisions in Parliament were being made by men. And, you know, we tried everything to get in the Labour Party, because we believe in equality, we tried everything to get to have more women Labour MPs. But somehow the men always kept getting the seats.
So we like your husband. He was elected on an all-women shortlist, wasn't he?
He was not elected on an all-women shortlist.
Well, it was supposed to be, but you didn't have some hand in fixing that?
Even I don't believe you should have 100% all-women shortlist. Even I believe that there should be some men in Parliament. And, in fact, there's still too many of them. But so basically, we tried all sorts of different ways, but the only way we could ensure that there were women in Parliament was to actually set aside some seats and say, this seat has got to be represented by a woman. And it does feel uncomfortable, but you can't just keep saying the situation is unfair and not do anything about it. And I do think that the fact that there's been so many more women in the Labour Party in Parliament has meant that the other parties have had to look to their laurels, and the women in the other parties have been able to say to the men, look, get a move on, you're lagging behind the Labour Party. And also issues like domestic violence and childcare and all those sorts of issues that never got a look in when it was a sort of men-only Parliament. Women have actually changed the discussion and the decisions in politics, as well as changing the face in politics. So we're going to carry on with them, uncomfortable as though they are.
Now, let me remind you, you can, of course, watch us on lbc.co.uk. Lots of you are doing that already. Remember, in 1960, in the presidential debates, people who watched on television thought that Kennedy had won. If they listened on the radio, they thought Nixon had won. So I don't know if we're going to get a split opinion at the end of this. I'm not going to even speculate about which one's which. Nikki Morgan, your answer to the question from Kirsty.
Well, I think what all women shortlists don't do is they don't ultimately change the overall the selections and the reasons why people choose in local parties certain types of candidates. And I don't disagree with what's been said already about the fact we need more women in politics. And Harriet's absolutely right. And one thing I would, recognise Harriet for is the fact that she's been in Parliament for 30 years and brought up a family. And that's I know from colleagues, and I've got a 7-year-old who are doing it. It's not easy, but the number of women MPs in the Conservative Party has tripled under David Cameron through a variety of different means, particularly obviously the A-list, but also mentoring programmes and bringing more women in. And I think a lot of it's incumbent on those of us sitting around this table to show why women make great members of Parliament. What do members of Parliament do? I think one of the tragedies recently is the recent programme about the House of Commons didn't show what members of Parliament actually did. But I do hope that Diane, I know you're about to come to her, might just possibly want to distance herself from the comments of the Fareham and Gosport UKIP membership secretary, who, when a colleague of mine, who's going to be a colleague of mine in May, Suella Fernandez, was selected for Fareham, she's a fantastic lady, fantastic candidate, said that it's doubly sad to think she's probably been chosen down to her gender and ethnicity rather than her actual talents. If that's what UKIP think about women who get selected, then I'm interested to hear Diane's point about the answer to this.
Well, Diane, Patrick O'Flynn was talking about this at the launch of your Women's Manifesto, said that UKIP had traditionally been a bit of an unfriendly party towards women.
I certainly agree with the comment that Patrick made this morning, which is we have got instances where, quite frankly, it's a turn-off to women coming into politics. I would add to that, though, I sourced this sort of opinion from women I try to encourage to come in as councillors, be it a parish, borough, whatever. And the comments that they put back to me are, for instance, Louise Mensch, the Conservative MP that stood down because she had to put her family first. She wasn't able to mix family and politics. That's a real red flag to a lot of women who want to try and combine that. And there was obviously a peer model telling them that it was impossible. I think the next instance, it's a real turn-off for women, and it reflects very, very badly on our three-party political leaders at the moment, is the standard of Prime Minister's question time on a Wednesday. I mean, quite frankly, it looks like a men-only adult bear trap. It's unpleasant to watch. It's quite unacceptable, some of the diatribe that goes on, and women land up disengaging from that. So I can understand why my colleagues around the table this evening are in favour of quotas. They're in favour of all women shortlists. UKIP is not. We happen to have a third of our MEPs are female. I'm one of them. And we have come up through the ranks because we're interested in the role. We want to represent our country, and we don't need the quota in the A-list.
Let me just press you on the point that Nikki Morgan made about, and not just that particular gentleman, but other candidates have made it quite difficult for women to really come forward and support UKIP, haven't they, by some of the comments that they've made?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, Ian. And David Cameron, calm down, dear, to Nadine Dorries, a fellow Conservative MP, didn't do his part.
I think that was Angela Eagle, to be fair, but he also did something to Nadine Dorries.
OK, thank you for the correction. But, you know, if that's the way, if you like, the accepted behaviour in the House of Commons, endorsed by my three political colleagues this evening here, I do think that's where women start to draw a line.
I'm not quite sure they've actually talked about that, but we do need to move on to a different subject now, I'm afraid. Let's go to Kelly in Barnet. Kelly, what's your question?
My question is, does keeping the NHS free at the point of use constrain us from making the changes needed to improve it?
Good question. Harriet Harman?
Absolutely not. I think it's vital that it remains free at the point of use. And I think that one of the changes it needs more working together with social care so that elderly people don't end up in hospital because they're not being properly looked after at home, or they can't go home because there's nobody to look after them at home. But I think another change it needs an injection of cash. And that's why we would say there would be a mansion tax and a tobacco levy to put extra doctors and nurses and midwives and home care assistants into the NHS. I think that the NHS is a brilliant organisation. It costs less per head than far inferior health systems in other countries. We should absolutely cherish it, but make sure that it's got enough funds. We still pay less per head on healthcare than most other countries.
What do you say to people who say, well, the NHS is maybe doing too much, that there should be charges introduced for, say, tattoo removal, gastric bans, things like that, that aren't necessarily necessities? Why should the taxpayer pay for that?
Well, you know, if you've got, these things are often medical judgments, but if you've got a situation where you've got obesity, which is really damaging your health, and there's no other way to tackle it, then it might well be that the best medical treatment is a gastric ban. But yes, we should have more information about fat, salt, sugar. We should have more exercise. We should have a whole load of ways of dealing with it. But I don't think you should point at any particular medical treatment and say that should not be on the NHS.
Nicky Morgan, is injecting cash, as Harriet Harman suggests, the only way to save the NHS?
Well, I think funding the NHS properly is very important. That's exactly what we've done over the course of this Parliament. We've put £12 billion more into the NHS. It's been ring-fenced. We've got 9,500 more doctors, 2,000 more midwives, 6,900 more nurses, and 7,000 fewer bureaucrats. And I think having it free at the point of use is very, very important. It's actually a totemic part of our NHS, which I think is a fantastic service, and it needs to be supported all. And Harriet, I just would ask about the mansion tax. I think the mansion tax on its own, and you'll have lots of London MPs who are unhappy about the mansion tax, as you all know, is not going to provide the money.
MP and I'm not unhappy about
Tessa Jowell, David Lammy, there's quite a lot of people who have said that this is absolutely not right. But anyway, regardless of that you know that the mansion tax is not going to put all the money that the NHS needs in the course of the next 5 years. How else are you going to raise the money?
That's big, because it's not just the mansion tax, although the mansion tax is a very good idea and will put money into the NHS, but also a levy on the tobacco companies, which I think is good thinking, because actually they cause a lot of ill health, and also some changes in tax funds in the way that hedge funds are taxed.
Just before I go to Diane and Lynn, Harriet, do you accept, though, that even if a political party promised to put £50 billion into the NHS extra, there would still be further demands that would be made of the NHS?
I don't believe the NHS is a bottomless pit, and I think people are very reasonable about this. But I think people also know from their own experience that now, since the Tories have been in government, it's much harder to get an appointment with a GP. Now when you go to A&E, you have to wait much longer. Now we've seen the waiting list going up. And I have to say, and this goes back to before Nicky's time, because she's only recently been in Parliament, actually, when we had a Tory government before, the NHS got into a terrible state, with people waiting 18 months for hip replacements, with waiting overnight in A&E, and with buckets to catch the drips in hospital wards. And we changed that. And what always happens is when there's a Conservative-led government in, it's always bad for the NHS. And when there's a Labour government, we come along, we rebuild it, and we'll do it again.
Hang on a second.
Nicky, I do need to go to Diane. I promise I'll bring you back in a minute. Diane, is UKIP the party of the NHS? Because you send conflicting messages on this sometimes.
Well, if they're conflicting, I can only apologise, Ian. The The major point that we want to get over is that we are the National Health Service, we're not the International Health Service. And so there have been issues, and I will actually raise it now before my colleagues do this evening, where we've said individuals coming into this country, they don't bring their disease with them. We want to see the investment in the healthcare systems via our overseas aid budget so that they can stay in their own country and be treated there. And thus the monies that the NHS has can be prioritised and provided for people here. That would address some of the issues, for instance, in terms of individuals who can't get cancer treatment. Harriet, there's a minute. I've just finished for a moment.
Let Diane finish.
There'd be nobody there at the bedside.
Let Diane finish.
What I was going to finish by just commenting on, thank you, Harriet, is that if the coalition government hadn't created the chaos and the upheaval that they did with Andrew Lansley's healthcare reforms, and which Jeremy Hunt has continued with, there has been 20 billion taken out of the NHS in this coalition government period. That's over 5 years. Now, it's all very well promising to put back in 3 billion, 7 billion, 9 billion, whatever the figure comes up. The point is 20 billion's been taken out. That's had an impact.
Just before I go to Lynn, though, since you raised it, do you stand by Nigel Farage's comments on HIV and not wanting people to come into the country who've got HIV?
Yes, and I'd stand by it because in 2004, John Reid, Labour Health Secretary, said exactly the same. And last year, 20 Tory MPs also stated the same. We talked about HIV.
OK. Lynn?
Yeah, I find that quite difficult and shocking. Anyway, in terms of Liberal Democrats, of course, free at the point of delivery. And the Liberal Democrats have come up with the 8 billion that Simon Stevens, who is the head of NHS England, is asking for by 2020.
Well, where's it coming from?
OK, so there's 2 billion extra already provided by the coalition. We would baseline that into the budget. Capping pensioner tax relief, aligning dividend tax with income tax, ending shares for rights. I made some notes because I don't always remember the list of things that will add up to the 8 billion. And of course, after 17-18, we would allow public spending to rise with growth. But the important thing that I really want to go on to is it's not just about the money. The Liberal Democrats have put mental health to be on parity with physical health. The integration, as Harriet rightly says, of social care and the health service is vital. Prevention, absolutely, or demand will be never ending. But after the election, because, you know, the NHS is turning into a bit of a football, like who privatised what, and I could go into that, maybe we will in a minute.
Well, we can't actually, because it's time for Nicky Morgan's Ask Me Anything session.
No, but we need a new settlement.
No, Lynn, we do need to move on. So it's Nicky Morgan, you're in the hot seat now. I'm sure you'll get a chance to come back on the health service in just a second. Lynn Featherstone, what would you like to ask Nicky Morgan?
Right. Well, it really goes back to what I was talking about earlier. So raising the personal allowance is popular Lib Dem policy, and I can understand why the Conservatives are clinging to it like a life raft. But don't you think it's obvious that these tax cuts for low earners came from the Lib Dems and that the tax cuts for the millionaires came from the Conservatives? And don't you think it's important to be honest? We are delighted that the Conservatives now want to do it themselves.
That's a very long question.
It is a long question.
Nicky?
Well, no, because I think George Osborne is the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It's under, in the budgets that he has announced, that these changes have been made.
Nicky.
I think we all agree that lifting people out of paying income tax is it's the right thing to do. We've got 3 million people who are not paying any tax at all now. 58% of them are women. And we've got over 26 million people who are paying less income tax than they did. And that's what goes back to my question, Lynn, which is actually I don't think it is right that Lib Dem saying we did this, they did that. Actually, we stand, all of us, on our record over the past 5 years as a coalition government.
OK, Harriet Harman?
Nicky, today the Defence Secretary Michael Fallon said that if Ed Miliband became Prime Minister, he would stab this country in the back. Do you dissociate yourself from that sort of gutter politics, or do you go along with it?
I think that in this election, people want to know both about what every party is going to do over the course of the next 5 years. But I think they also realise there are only two people who can be Prime Minister after May the 7th, either David Cameron, who's demonstrated leadership, or Ed Miliband. And Ed Miliband's character and the way that he would be, and I'm afraid to say, when you ask people about Ed Miliband, the thing that most people know about him is the way that he did stab his brother in the back. And that goes to the judgment people make about him letting the country down.
He stabbed him in the front, Nicky.
Well, all right, we can have a debate about exactly where the knife entered his
But
ribs.
I can't imagine you using the kind of language that was used in that Michael Fallon article today. I mean, Harriet has surely got a point.
It's the same as when the Daily Mail said about Ed Miliband's father that he hated Britain. It's this awful smear tactic. And I mean, disagree with what he's proposing for this country, if you will. But this is a concerted, malicious, and it really brings our politics down. And Nikki, you know, you ought to be standing up against this sort of thing. And at least Cameron sounded a bit shamefaced about it today. He didn't actually disassociate himself, but he at least sounded a bit embarrassed. Nikki's not even sounding embarrassed about it. I really, honestly, don't dig yourself in. You should not say that. That's not how we win elections in this country.
Well, I think that at elections there are some parties who talk about the future, which is exactly what the Conservative Party is doing. We're setting out our plan for the country, and there are those who talk about the past. But I think it's absolutely right. I can tell you, people on the streets of where I'm campaigning are say a lot worse things about your leader, Harriet, and the kind of person he is, the kind of leader that he would be. And I think it's absolutely right to point out, at the end of the day, whoever becomes Prime Minister is going to have to make some very difficult decisions. One of those decisions will be about the nuclear deterrent that this country has. And so far, all we've heard is confusion from the Labour Party about their policy on that.
Diane, if you can make your question fairly short, please.
Yes. Nikki, you had a very expensive, I understand, academic education. Why, in terms of the party you represented, are you so determined to stop young children who could attend a grammar school? Why are you denying them of that opportunity, which would actually put ambition and aspiration over money?
So, grammar schools, shouldn't we have more of them?
What we need is a good local school for every child to attend. Education is the great life-transforming opportunity, and we, under this government, have seen 1 million more children in schools rated good or outstanding over the course of the past 5 years. And my plan for education, if I'm lucky enough to be Education Secretary after May the 7th, is to make sure that excellence that is available, I see up and down the country, fabulous teaching, fabulous schools. I want that to be available for absolutely everyone. We don't have a problem with grammar schools. We don't have a problem with free schools, academies, maintained schools. I just want every child to go to an excellent local school.
We have much more coming up with our 4 panellists, Harriet Harman, Nikki Morgan, Diane James and indeed Lynn Featherstone. This is LBC, it's 7:46. Well, welcome back. Harriet Harman is with us, Diane James, Lynn Featherstone and Nikki Morgan. We're halfway through our LBC Women Leaders debate. Let's go have a text from Tom in Penge, who says, do you believe at one point there was a Westminster paedophile ring? Nikki Morgan.
I'm afraid I have no evidence either way. What I do think is that, as Theresa May has set out, there should be no holds-barred investigation. Any papers that the Justice Lowell Goddard investigation needs should be made available. And I think, as Theresa said, there should be no fear or favour. I mean, I think wherever the evidence leads, that's exactly where the inquiry should go.
Diane James?
I was watching a programme on TV last night when an individual from Irish descent talked about this subject, and he was very emotional, and he was able to give examples, and he took the camera and the interviewer to various locations around London. I take the point that Nikki's making. At the moment, it's an allegation, but certainly from the information that I saw on that TV programme and that very emotional interview that the individual undertook, I would go as far to say there must be something there, and obviously it needs investigating.
Lynn Featherstone.
Yes, I mean, I think, obviously, I don't know for sure, but given all of the rumours, allegations, etc. that have come out, the finding of files that are not yet published, which I think should be published, the worst thing possible is to have any sort of cover-up. Everything should be out there. This is not just, obviously this is reported to be a very high-level ring, you know, involving very high-level politicians, so even more a requirement that it needs to be out there. But I think it is a tip of an iceberg that we're discovering in this country, that it goes through every level, right through the country, and the behaviour that is being uncovered is an abomination.
I mean, all of the evidence does point to some organised activity within Westminster, does it not?
Yes, and I think the sooner we know about it and expose it, and Justice Goddard gets on with the abuse inquiry, The more we know, the better. And the files need to be published. It's no good keeping saying we can't publish this material.
Do you condemn or praise Simon Dancher, the Labour MP for Rochdale, for the work that he's done in uncovering what happened with Cyril Smith?
Yeah, I praise him. I don't care if they're liberal, conservative. I don't care who comes. If they're a paedophile and they've done this stuff, then it is disgusting, and they deserve to be outed, and they deserve.
So why did your leader Nick Clegg condemn Simon Dancher on LBC this morning?
Did he? Well, did. I must listen to my leader more often, obviously. I don't know, because I don't know. I mean, I haven't been following Simon Danchuk, so I don't know what he was particularly referring to. But he has done the work, and at this point it is an allegation. But what I'm saying is, if whatever the allegation is, we need to uncover it. This is like a cancer right in the soul and heart of our government.
But the problem is, though, that there was always suspicion that Liberal politicians knew exactly what Sir Cyril Smith was up to and covered it up. Did you never hear anything about his activities?
No, not until very recently.
Harriet Harman.
Well, I think, obviously, I agree that those allegations that have been made are absolutely serious and should be investigated. But the really thing that this points to is that when you've got people in positions of power and you've got vulnerable young people, then it's very easy for the people in positions of power to abuse their power, and for the vulnerable young people not to be listened to, not to be believed, and then the abusers get away with it. And we've seen that there's been a pattern here, whether it was Jimmy Savile, who was like untouchable, he was like above the law, and what he got away with, and all people in mental hospitals, in other hospitals, in children's homes, that he abused. And the young people that he abused felt they couldn't say anything, because why would anybody believe them if they were accusing somebody who was so high up as Jimmy Savile? And it was the same with the Catholic Church. And I think what we've got to recognise... Well, we're talking about
Westminster
but what we've got to recognise is that we mustn't allow abuse of power. And that is what we've got to guard against.
You can, of course, watch us at lbc.co.uk, as well as listen to us by whatever means you are listening. Let's go to Graham in Morden. He's got an interesting question. Graham, what is it?
Good evening, Ian.
Evening.
And your panel. I'd like to ask if Putin was to move into places like Latvia, what would your next move be as potential leaders?
Sorry.
If Vladimir Putin were to move into Latvia, I suppose as he's done in Ukraine, what would your next move be if you were Prime Minister, part of a government that was in power at the time? Lynn Featherstone.
Well, I would get together with other international leaders, obviously. And I think we would have to look very seriously at what further actions could be taken. Obviously, to intensify sanctions in the first instance. But ultimately, we need to understand that Putin is not seemingly cowed, obviously, by those sanctions.
And would you invoke Article 5 of NATO?
I'm not sure, to be quite frank at this point.
Article 5 means that all members of NATO have to come to the rescue of anyone that's invaded. Harriet Harman, what would you do?
Well, I agree with Lynn that basically if that were to happen, and perish the thought, that there should be tough sanctions and united international action. And I think really we would need to go as far as all the other European countries would feel able to go, because...
But this is a NATO issue. This is not an EU issue, is it?
Yeah, and NATO as well. That basically you have to act solidly together internationally. It's no good taking a position on your own against Putin doing something like that. You have to work internationally.
If sanctions against Russia haven't worked over Ukraine, and he then still took some sort of action against Latvia, sanctions aren't going to work there, are they?
Well, it's a question of the level of the sanctions, because you can always step them up, and it's about stepping them up until such time.
And the Russian economy has been hit by the sanctions. It's not as if they've got away scot-free or not feeling the pain from the action that the international community has taken.
Well, I think it would be incredibly serious. I'm sure there will be international efforts. I'm sure people look at sanctions, but there comes a point with any bully when you have to stand up to them. And if we have signed up to international obligations, that's why I think a strong defence is critical for this country. And there comes a point when Britain plays a leading part in the world. I think we are a leading player in international affairs, and we would have to say, right, this is why we have a strong defence. This is why we have invested in our armed forces. This is why we dealt £38 billion black hole in the defence budget. we now have to work with international
You
partners.
use the phrase standing up to them.
others.
What does that mean? Does that mean airstrikes? Does that mean boots on the ground? Should we indeed be sending troops as a deterrent now?
Well, I think it would very much depend. I think it would obviously depend on the invitation or the request from the Latvian government. When I was a Treasury Minister, I was in charge of the EU budget, and I went and met. Well, it was a certain education, and but we used to have meetings, and obviously with the Latvians, it was very interesting actually hearing about the situation already and their concerns. But if we signed up to international obligations, as I say, with all bullies, regardless of where they are in the world, eventually there comes a moment. I'm not going to mandate whether it was also prescribed now, what kind of action it would be, but there comes a point we have to stand up to them.
Diane James, Vladimir Putin is quite popular with certain members of your party, including your leader, isn't he?
Well, Nigel certainly went on record of saying that if you provoke the Russian bear, you're going to get a reaction, and that was a statement he made in the EU Parliament in the chamber. And I think...
Do you admire him yourself, Vladimir Putin?
I admire him from the point of view that he's standing up for his country. Now that
by invading others?
No, he's standing up for his country. He's very nationalist.
What would you call the invasion of Crimea? Apart from an invasion?
You asked me if I admired him, and I've responded by saying I do admire him. He is a very strong leader. He is putting Russia first, and he has issues with the way the EU encouraged a change of government in the Ukraine, which he felt put at risk and put in danger a Russian population in that country. Now, forgive me, Graham, in terms of your question, I don't know the proportion of Russians that make up Latvia. That's my mistake. I'll go back to my geography lessons on that.
But I think it's about 25%.
OK, I will pick up on the point that I don't think the sanctions are working. There is very clear evidence, for instance, the French, who are busy trying to sell 2 warships to Russia, actually aren't upholding the EU sanctions. So one then is left with the situation that if we are going to abide by our NATO commitments, and at the moment we're not even abiding by the 2% we're meant to contribute to the budget, I'm left wondering what the United Kingdom would do.
What qualities does Vladimir Putin share with Nigel Farage?
No idea.
You must have some thought. I'm sure the other 3 could come in on this.
Well, I tell you what, shall we ask them? I'll hear their responses and then I'll make some comments, because no doubt
we won't.
They won't be very complimentary.
I want to move on to Harriet Harman's Ask Me Anything 5 minutes. And let's start off with Nicky Morgan. What would you like to ask Harriet?
Well, Harriet, in January of this year, you interviewed on the Sunday Politics show, and you talked about the need to eliminate the deficit, and you talked about by doing that both by spending cuts but also by tax increases. And I would invite you now to rule out one potential tax rise, which could be fuel duty. We have frozen fuel duty in this Parliament. That's made a huge difference to household budgets. It's something that we are
I'm
very
going to
proud
have
of.
to ask for quicker questions than this.
Well, would Harriet please rule out a future Labour government raising fuel duty?
OK, this is what we've said so far in our manifesto on tax. We rule out increasing VAT, the basic or the higher rate of tax. We will put up the top rate of tax. We will not put up the national insurance rates. And for all the other taxes that there are, airport... airport taxes, I can't remember what they're called.
Airport passenger duties.
Yes, that's right. Airport passenger duties, or alcohol duties, or tobacco, or petrol. We will lay that out in the budget. But we've been very specific. And actually, one of the things that was very disappointing about your government, Nicky, is that you promised you wouldn't put up VAT in the first budget you did. You put it up and it hurt a lot of people, caused them to be worse off.
But then we saw the Liam Byrne note, sorry, there's no money left. We had to deal with a huge deficit and a huge debt that you left us.
OK, Diane James.
OK, Harriet, UKIP has promised to keep the NHS free. Labour's record on the NHS isn't particularly good. In fact, it was your Labour peer that suggested charging for NHS services. Since then, we've had MRSA scandals, mid-staff scandals and such. Could you comment on why you think you've got any claim to be able to say you're going to protect and save the NHS?
Well, because the fact of the matter is that before we got into government in 1997, the NHS was in a very difficult situation. And I remember seeing my constituents in my advice surgery and people coming in tears and showing me a letter from King's College college hospitals saying you're now listed for your operation for your hip replacement. It'll be 2 years' time. I mean, the situation in the health service was really bad, and we trebled the amount of money went into the health service, and we made sure that patients were seen and dealt with on time. So when you say our record wasn't particularly good on the NHS, we rescued the NHS, and we believe in it because we don't believe that people should have to be forced to go private.
Would you accept, though, that the Labour Party brought in private providers to reduce waiting lists?
Well, it was a capacity issue that basically if you didn't have...
Many would say the right thing to do, but now we hear a lot about how the private sector shouldn't be involved in healthcare.
There's two very different things. One is that if you've got a commitment to getting waiting lists down, and as we found when we came into government, there weren't enough doctors and nurses and hospital beds to get those waiting lists down, then actually paying the private sector to treat NHS patients free, that is absolutely a good thing to do. But actually hiving off bits of the NHS into the private sector and fragmenting it is not a good thing. So I think that private facilities supporting NHS objectives is one thing, but it's quite another to fragment it and privatise it.
Well, you can follow the debate on Twitter, #BritainDecides, and of course watch us at lbc.co.uk. Lynn Featherstone, your question to Harriet Harman.
OK, Harriet, are Labour still planning to remove all housing benefit for under 25s? And as Rachel Reeves put it, be tougher than the Tories on benefits?
Well, we want to make sure that under 25s can actually get a job and nobody be unemployed. And we've got a whole range of issues for under 25s. But we do think that the situation that we'll face with the deficit being £90 billion still, although the coalition that you're part of said it would eliminate it by 2015, that we are going to have to make a number of difficult decisions. But what we won't do, we will be as fair as we possibly can on it. So, for example, we will abolish the bedroom tax, and we will put up the tax on people on over £150,000 because we think they should be able to bear a fairer burden of it.
You would not have used that language, though, that Rachel Reeves used, would you? You would not have said we will be tougher than the Tories on benefits. You must have winced at that.
I think what she was saying is that actually there will be difficult decisions to be made, and nobody in the Labour Party wants to see any benefits or public services being cut back, but we did have to put a lot of money behind the banks when there was the global financial crisis, therefore a deficit built up, and therefore we have to pay that down because we don't want to be paying too much money on interest rates.
You would not have used that language.
Well, I might well have done. I can't remember what it is she said, but
we will be tougher than the Tories on benefits.
If that's what she said, I'm happy to go along with that. I think she's absolutely excellent, and I wouldn't see any difference in how she sees things as I do.
Let's move on. Mel is in Godalming. Hello, Mel.
Hi there.
Hi, what's your question?
I wanted to ask, is it more important to incentivise women to return to work after maternity leave, or to subsidise women who stay at home with their children?
Interesting dilemma. Lynn Featherstone.
I think at this point in time it's more important to incentivise women if they wish to return to work, and that's why the Liberal Democrats are saying that from 9 months to 2 years childcare will be free, and ultimately for all 2-year-olds and 20 hours for 3 and 4-year-olds. Because for women who want to work, this is absolutely no criticism or anything of women who want to stay home and look after their children.
But they feel that it is a criticism because they're not getting anything out of this.
Well, they are making a choice to stay at home, which many women would like to do but can't do. But for those women who have to return, we have to enable them to return to work. It actually benefits the nation in a way. And I'm sure for those who can make the choice to stay at home, it's a wonderful choice to make, but it's not something that I think the government can underwrite.
OK, Nicky Morgan.
I think what we want is women to be able to have a choice. I mean, I think Lynn is right that for some families there isn't a choice. There is a need for 2 salaries, or alternatively, and I was in this position, actually, I wanted to go back to work. But I think the important thing is that women are able to make that choice, and they're able to have that discussion. And that's why we have obviously spent £1 billion more on childcare in this Parliament. I'm very keen on looking at women returners to work, how we support them. That's one of the things that we have done, my job as Minister for Women, but also obviously Secretary for Education, lots of women working in schools. And again, I'm looking at ways of encouraging more women to come back into to teaching at the time that is right for them. But for those who want to stay at home, obviously there is the 3 and 4-year-old childcare offer and the 2-year-old childcare offer for those disadvantaged families. But also, of course, from last week, in fact, I think it's from earlier this week, the married couples tax allowance came into force, which is, a small step, but a way of recognising those for whom perhaps one of the partners is not returning to work, one of the half of the couple, and therefore they can transfer their tax allowance.
How did you deal with this dual responsibility? I mean, you've had a high-powered career. I think you were a lawyer before you became an MP. You've had a stratospheric rise through the ranks. How do you deal with it?
Well, I have a lovely, fantastic, supportive husband, and he is leading on the childcare front at the moment. I had 6 months maternity leave and then went back to work in the city after I'd had my son, and we were in the position of being able to afford childcare that suited us and that gave me the hours that I needed. But it is a juggling thing, and I think it kind of goes back actually to the point we were talking about earlier on about why we need more women in politics, why we need more women in the House of Commons. We're talking about these sorts of issues. And I should just say, actually, before I get lots of phone calls and tweets, actually, childcare is not just a women's issue. It is a family issue.
Definitely.
It's a parents' issue.
That's why shared parental leave is so important.
Yes, completely.
And you raised the issue of inside the Commons before, and Jenny Willett, my Lib Dem colleague, she was shown with the children being fed in offices and wheeled through, not through the lobbies, and being held in the whip's office. I cannot tell you how much hate mail she got, trolling, and how dare you be such a terrible mother, how dare you go into politics.
I mean, how bad is it, Nicky Morgan, for women who've got children who are MPs? We were talking earlier about the fact that it is quite difficult for many women to put off going into politics, and I suspect this might be one reason. Do you think so?
Well, I think that the reaction, and I'm aware of some of the comments that Jenny has had, which I think are absolutely inexcusable. And I think that a lot of women, that's why a lot of women would think twice about putting themselves forward, actually, regardless of whether they're juggling childcare or other caring responsibilities or anything else. I think a lot of the public commentary about being a woman in the front line in public life. Actually, I have to say, I've certainly found, now that my son is at school, that actually a lot of the hours and the sittings of the Commons work very well in terms of his half-terms and holidays, but it is a demanding 7-day a week, pretty full on job, and you can juggle a lot of things. It also depends, I often say this to women candidates, about where your seat is going to be, how close it is to London, and also having support of your family.
Diane James.
Well, it's a very, very difficult dilemma, isn't it? And for the 1.4 million ladies out there, women out there who've chosen to become self-employed, start their own businesses, that dilemma is really up close and personal for them. And the sort of issues that they face, an average of £6,000 per year to actually fund childcare, £120 per week. They've got to be earning an awful lot of money to afford those sort of figures, and in a large proportion of cases they are the single adult wage earner, breadwinner in that household. So I do think we've actually got to try and address both angles. We've got to encourage women to realise their aspirations and give them the best in terms of supporting them if they want to couple that with having a family. If that actually necessarily needs subsidising, I'm not entirely convinced of that. I think it's more an issue of actually tackling taxation, personal taxation, and taking as many women as possible out of the taxation, the first band of taxation, and allowing them to retain as much money as they possibly can to give them a fair deal, quite frankly.
Harriet Harman, I'm going to ask you to be a little brief on this one.
Oh, God, I was going to speak for absolutely hours.
I can imagine.
Pick the wrong question. But, OK, so I think for a lot of women, listening to the question of choice being talked about would just bring them, hollow laughter. Many women don't feel they've got the choice to stay at home because maternity pay and leave is just not maternity pay is not high enough, and they end up going back to work before they feel the baby's ready because they just can't afford it with all the outgoings that they've got. So actually, although when we were in government, we doubled maternity pay, it's still not as much of an income replacement that it should be. Many women would like to go to work but can't afford the childcare, and therefore they find that they can't afford to go out to work, so they don't have choice either. And I think that for all we talk about the difficulties of being an MP, a woman MP, and bringing up young children, we at least are well paid and we've got some control over our hours. It's much harder for a woman on 0 hours doing a cleaning job.
Well,
so I think before we, complain about our own fate, we should sort things out for other women.
OK, Richard is in Manningtree. Richard, what's your question?
Good evening. Do any of the ladies see a future female prime minister in any of their political ranks?
Right, I'm going to ask for short answers on this. Let's go to Nicky Morgan.
Gosh, I hope so. I mean, not soon. I think David
Names?
Cameron is.
Names?
No, I'm not going to give you any. I'm not going to give you any names. But I think.
If none of you are going to give me any names, that's ridiculous.
Well, Ian, you're the commentator. You're the one that looks at.
It's a women leaders debate. You can surely identify one or two top-class females within your own party ranks, or indeed on the opposition benches.
Well, firstly, let me just say, I don't think there's going to be a vacancy in the leadership of the Conservative Party for some time to come.
We can all take that as read for the rest of your parties.
None of our leaders are going anywhere.
Exactly, but clearly, I mean, the Prime Minister mentioned obviously Theresa May not long ago. We've got obviously other women sitting around the cabinet table.
Nicky Morgan,
Liz Truss, Justin Goetz. Very kind of you, Ian. But I'm not going to give you a glib yes or no answer because we just talked about the challenges of juggling all of these things. But I think there's lots of women in the Conservative Party, and I think it would be good eventually to have another female Prime Minister.
Lynn Featherstone.
I think it would be fabulous to have a woman Prime Minister.
Well, we can take that as read, but that's not the question.
And obviously our leader is going nowhere. But I guess Jo Swinson is for the future.
OK. Diane James?
Well, she was very feisty last week, and she might even cause the breakup of the union. But I have to say, Nicola Sturgeon did extremely well.
Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
Exactly my point. given that her platform is.
What about UKIP women? You were asked this question actually the other day about Nigel Farage's successor. You did indeed name a UKIP woman.
I did indeed, Suzanne Evans, and I would be absolutely delighted to see her in that role, and I would support her in every capacity I could.
Harriet Harman.
Well, we've got lots of excellent women now in senior positions in the party. I mean, obviously, we want Ed Miliband to be going into Downing Street, but we have got the calibre of future leaders amongst people like Rachel Reeves, like Yvette Cooper, like Caroline Flint, like Rushanara Ali. But what will distinguish those women is that they're women who will fight for other women, not just fight to get their own place at the top, but actually use their place at the top to deliver for other women. Because it's not just about having a woman there, it's what she does when she's there.
I hate to tell you this, but Rachel Reeves told me on my show that she never wants to be leader of the Labour Party, so you'll have to think of another one there, Harriet. Now, Dennis in Margate has emailed, is it right that the taxpayer is essentially paying people to have children through child benefit? Nicky Morgan.
I think I would not accept the premise of the question. At the end of the day, we've had to make some difficult decisions, and although there are many families still receiving child benefit, there are obviously those who aren't as a result of the decisions we've had to take in order to balance the country's books. But I think it is right that there are benefits paid. We've already talked about the costs of having children, and actually, if that's going to give them a good start in life and means that families can have that choice and that flexibility about the right way to juggle childcare, work, and other things, then yes, I mean, I certainly think that child benefit is an important thing to pay out.
Harriet.
Well, I think the attitude there, your children, you had them, you look after them, they're nothing to do with us. I don't agree with that attitude. I think that children in this country are the future, will pay the pensions of this guy who tweeted or texted, whatever he did. They will, it'll be somebody else's child who's at his hospital bed being a nurse or a doctor if he gets ill. I mean, there is such a thing as society, and it is more expensive.
Do you think, though, that there ought to be a limit on the number of children that child benefit ought to apply to?
No, I don't, because I've got a sort of phobia about the idea of the state telling women this is how many children you should have and you shouldn't have any more, or you should be having more children. I think it's quite nervous territory, this. I think the truth is
no
it's
place
expensive.
for you in the Chinese government, then. Diane James.
Yeah. Well, UKIP's policy is to limit benefits to 2 children. I might as well state that up front. I think the question...
You sound almost apologetic.
No. I'm just making the point because I'm waiting for my colleagues here to, jump on me for even stating, and given what Harriet's just said, she's for everybody, let's just have as many children as we want and expect the state to pick up the cost. I think the view that most people would see as a common sense approach is that it's down to parents
but you don't want
to appreciate
to come in this country,
whether
you're going to financially penalise people in this country who have children. There'll be nobody left.
It's down to parents to appreciate the responsibility of having children, bringing children into the world, and providing them with the best opportunities. And if a message has to be sent or is there that says the state will not step in and subsidise and keep on subsidising, then I think that's just bringing an element of realism into
This is Nigel
the system.
Farage telling us how many children we should be having, God forbid.
Well, it's a bit like the French, isn't it? They currently allow, I think it's benefits for 4 children. And there's other countries that are doing a hell of a lot to actually encourage very large families.
Okay,
that's down to individual countries.
When I became an MP, at my very first surgery, a woman came to me with a baby at her breast. It was her 5th child. by 5 different men. And I guess that's someone that you would say didn't deserve any help. But what I tried to do was help because children need to be supported, but to also say to her, this is how you can get contraception, and to also question her taste in men.
And what did she say back to you? Mind your own business?
No, she didn't. We had a very, very good and long conversation. I actually think that there's something about human relationships, and people don't always know. They come from so many different familial backgrounds and challenges. Sometimes no one has taken the time to say to them, this is what's happening, okay. You are being used, you are making the wrong choices, and perhaps you can change someone's behaviour.
Well, it's time for our final Ask Me Anything. It's Diane James's turn for the hot seat. Lynn Featherstone, what's your question to Diane?
Whoa, let me find it. OK.
Anyone would think you'd prepared your question. Or maybe not. Well, let's go to Harriet while you're finding your question. Harriet.
I found it.
Oh, no, OK, go on then.
I have found it. Dan, in my local area, we have high levels of immigration, and unemployment has halved since 2010. In many UKIP target seats, the opposite is true. There's low immigration and high unemployment. So how do you justify Nigel Farage's rhetoric about high immigration causing unemployment?
It's not just unemployment, is it, Lynn? I mean, when it comes down to it, it's the pressures that immigration bring across the spectrum. Access to schools, access to the NHS, access to housing.
But he was talking about unemployment.
Yes, and I will go back to the point that if high levels of immigration, if they depress wages, people actually then can't afford to take out a mortgage, can't afford to even rent a property, for instance. That ultimately has an impact on the local area.
Is it not more a matter of like the work that's going on in the north, say, to have this new vision of employment and development?
The Northern Powerhouse.
The Northern Powerhouse, thank you. Is that not what is needed? Is that not the change that needs, rather than the attack on immigration? It's really about spreading employment and jobs throughout this country.
Well, you sounded then a little bit like Harriet with a suggestion she made a few minutes ago, which is that government starts becoming the nanny state and telling immigrants where they will go. And we either say that if people are going to come here, and the policy we have is one of controlling that access, but not then dictating that they will settle in particular areas, but ensuring that the infrastructure is there to cope with that.
Okay.
But I was pointing out they're not in those seats.
Lynn, thank you. Harriet Harman.
Obviously, it's important to have a sensible discussion about immigration, especially at a time of such big global migration, which is a growing phenomenon. But don't you sometimes look in the mirror and think to yourself, actually, haven't we just become a party whose whole essence is the nasty party, being divisive, blaming everybody else? Don't you sometimes think that just setting people against each other is not a way to get a better society that's more at ease with itself? It's easy to do, to turn everybody against each other. But don't we know from history, and don't we know from people's own experience, that is not the right thing to do, and actually has consequences and makes people who are good people who've come here and work hard feel unwanted and discriminated against?
I'm very glad we didn't ask for a long question, Ian. We have never, ever caused a situation where we have set individuals in a community against each other. If you can come up with the evidence that firmly locates that sequence of events to UKIP, I would like to hear about it. What we have said, and when we have 60% of the population agreeing that survey after survey, that they agree that we need to have some form of control on numbers of people coming to this country, the skills, the experience, the expertise that they offer, trying to stop wage decompression, trying to stop some of the really strangleholds that there is in terms of creating enough jobs and such, then I think that's a very, very sensible debate to have. And I find it just completely bemusing that your party allowed 4 million people to come in, relaxed every control going, and from my view, in terms of watching your colleagues in the European Parliament, you're just about to do that for the whole series of countries that also want to accede as EU member states, and you're just going to continue allowing this problem to develop.
Right, Nikki Morgan, quick question, please.
Other than grammar schools, I'd like to know what is your party's vision for education and also for young people in general?
OK, I'll try and give you just 2 points, if you don't mind. We can obviously take it offline afterwards. One of the areas that I'm particularly supportive of is where employers are saying that they have got issues with enough students with, say, maths sciences, engineering degrees. We have stated in our policy that we will see a relaxation of tuition fees for those core subjects as a start to address employer needs and also to try and influence students in terms of the choice of subjects that they study at university. That's a starter point. Obviously, we'd like to see tuition fees at universities completely reversed. You know, I think everyone around this table this evening, we've had free university education, the benefit of that. Why are we penalising generations in the future? The second point, which in a way couples with that, is to put more investment into vocational training, because not every student out there wants to be part of a Labour-instigated 50% target going into the university. They may well, if the right circumstances are there, to seek some form of on-the-job vocational training coupled with study. And that, I think, is the sort of key issues that represent the vision for the future from UKIP.
Right, let's go to an email from Rachel in Wigan, who says Rhiannon Evans is bidding to become the first woman to play in the World Snooker Championship alongside and against the men. She's playing a qualifier right now against Ken Doherty. Don't switch over. Would the panel like to see more sports where women play against men for the same money, and if so, which ones? Nikki Morgan.
Well, yes, I think I would. And I think that we are seeing more equality. Someone's reminded me today that we've got the Oxford and Cambridge boat race on Saturday, and I think it's the first time we're going to have the women's teams out there too. I think it's great to see more coverage of women's football, women's rugby. Whether paying, I don't think it's for government to say to sports bodies, this is how you should be doing things, how you should be organising. But I certainly think that the age of inequality
but
in
it's your
sport
opinion,
between men and women...
I'm not asking you to speak for the government, but your opinion. I mean, look at Wimbledon. Do you think the women should get equal prize money with the men?
Yes.
Even though they don't play as many sets?
Yes, I think it sends a very clear message, and that, if we're in favour of equality in something, we've got to, it's got to be across the board.
And should women be allowed to play alongside men in football if they're good enough?
Well, I think it would again depend on exactly on skills and all those sorts of debates. I'm not a football pundit.
Assuming they are good enough, what would be the logic of them not being able to?
Well,
I've never quite understood.
I agree,
this.
and I think the opportunity of having a mixed team, it would very much depend. Again, it goes back to, I don't think it's for government, any party to sit down and say to sports bodies, this is the way it should be. But if it's something that people absolutely want to do, the sports bodies want to take that on. I'm sure there's a role for single-sex teams, but there's also, I think, a role for mixed teams too.
Harriet Harman.
Well, I think that it will change, and I think with women's football, for example, we're seeing some incredible play and people's eyes are being opened up to that. And it is quite anomalous, isn't it, that girls can play football in primary school and suddenly, even however talented they are, they don't get to play in the junior leagues, and it's all sex segregated. But I also think that sport is unfair on women, that government money goes disproportionately to men's sports, sponsorship goes to men's sports. I mean, wasn't it the cricket team or something? The women's cricket team went on tour in economy class while the flipping men's team were in business. I mean, really, in this day and age.
I missed that one. Diane James.
But darts is one I might integrate straight away.
I think the decision...
Should women play dance?
I think the decision ultimately ought to rest with the various sports governing bodies. They're the ones that are going to be able to evaluate objectively whether it could happen or shouldn't happen.
They're full of men as well.
No
objective evaluation.
I want your opinion.
OK, can I give you a personal anecdote? I used to play field hockey, mixed team field hockey. And it was very interesting being on a hockey pitch with fellow male members.
I've done that as well.
And it's, put it this way...
Vicious women.
Well, actually, I would have said the other way. But I think, personally, I'd love to see it happen. But it's going to be down to personal choice, and I'd like the guidance coming from the various sports governing bodies to give us the evaluation and tell us what the level of risk is.
Lynn Featherstone.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Women should be able to play in single-sex teams or with men. If they're of the same standard, there is absolutely no reason. But the real inhibitor has been commercial sponsorship and raising media coverage, because it doesn't get anywhere near the coverage or funding that male sports get. Now, there have been a couple of our teams that have done sensationally. I've met the women's rugby team. Amazing, but really, until the money, because it seems to be a follow the money issue rather than women can't do it. Women certainly can do it and do it, and they're brilliant to watch.
Right, let's move on, and let's hear from Jasmine in High Wycombe. Jasmine, what would you like to ask?
Hi, I'm 18 years old in May, and I'll be voting for the first time this year. Can each of you tell me why I should vote for you?
Now, I wanted Jasmine to ask that question because you've all got a closing statement to make. You've got a maximum of 1 minute, and I'd like you, if you can, to appeal to Jasmine and people like her of her age group as to why they should vote for your particular parties. Lynn Featherstone, we're going to start with you.
Sorry, is this the closing statement?
This is the closing statement.
And
I want you to speak almost directly to Jasmine there.
All right, Jasmine, you're coming up for the first time to vote. So if you vote for a Liberal Democrat, what do you get? You get someone who's going to fight for civil liberties and for freedom. You're going to get someone who's going to fight for fairness, for the NHS. You're going to get someone who cares about the planet. You're going to get the sort of party that you would want to stand up for those who need to be fought for. The Lib Dems have taken lowest paid out of tax. We've given pensioners a rise. That's probably not your end of the market. But at my end of the market, and what I've done in government, is things like changing the world, which is what I went into politics to do. I'm the originator and architect of same-sex marriage. It's a Liberal Democrat policy. I'm the originator and architect of the campaign against female genital mutilation. Never been touched before. And I've been fighting for disability in the developing world. And I would say to you, first, vote for a party you believe in. And secondly, get involved in politics and change the world yourself.
Lynn Featherstone, exactly on time. We like that. Nikki Morgan, that's your challenge now.
Well, I would say, Jasmine, the first thing is, Jasmine, please vote, please have your say. The Conservative Party, I think, has a very clear plan to secure a better future for you and for this country. We want a country that's living within its means. That means there's not more debt for the next generation, that has full employment, that rewards work, that gives every child the best start in life, that offers everyone security in retirement, and where everyone who works hard can own their own home. I'm very proud of the Conservative Party, the coalition government's record on women. We've got more women in work. We've got women paying less tax. We've protected funding for specialist domestic abuse, domestic violence support services. The gender pay gap is the lowest ever. And we've legislated on issues like revenge porn and also things like Clare's Law. And we want to do more of that in the next 5 years. There's only 2 people who can be Prime Minister. And I think that David Cameron has shown absolute leadership over the course of the last 5 years. We are repairing our economy. We can only have strong public services, which I think we all care about, with a strong economy.
To time as well. Harriet Harman?
Well, I would say, Jasmine, as a young woman, that I would hope that you would vote Labour, because I think it's important for there to be, despite all the progress that women have made, that there should be every opportunity for women, and that the inequality and the barriers that are still there for young women being the best they can be, making all the choices they can make, you need a party that will actually tear down those barriers and actually enable you to make more progress. We believe in a fairer, more just society. We believe in good public services as well as a prosperous economy. But really, we fight for women's rights in the Labour Party. But I would also agree with Nikki, finally, to say that whatever you do, please vote. You know, the suffragettes fought for your right to vote. We're going to try and give you a reason to vote, but please do vote.
Diane James, final word to you.
Jasmine, absolutely delighted to hear of your decision. Please encourage as many of your colleagues and your friends to do the same. We hear all too often of young people that are completely disengaged from politics, and that's not the future. The choice you have, though, is UKIP, in terms of a party that wants to see control returned back to the United Kingdom. We don't see our future shackled to the EU concept, which is now out of date, doesn't represent value for money, and doesn't represent the future for the United Kingdom. Over and over again, independent authoritative bodies tell us that the United Kingdom can do better outside the European Union, and we want your vote. Thank you.
Diane, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Jasmine. Jasmine, has that persuaded you to vote?
Definitely going to vote. To be as concise as possible, I would say Labour perhaps convinced me the most, because although Liberal Democrats have got this idea of peace and like the world and kind of helping everyone, I don't think I can quite forgive the U-turn on the tuition fees, and that's very current for me at the minute. I want to be able to afford not only at university but post-university.
OK. And, Jasmine, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for asking that really good question. And thanks also to Diane James, Harriet Harman, Nikki Morgan and Lynn Featherstone for taking part tonight. That brings us to the end of the LBC Women Leaders debate. Now, if you hadn't made up your mind before tonight's debate, hopefully we've clarified at least a few issues for you. And of course, the debate doesn't end here. We're continuing the conversation on LBC with your reaction to the last 90 minutes. This is LBC. It's 8:30.